Geoff, hi, it's good to see you, and it's good to be sitting here sharing with you as we talk about the potential of you being Baptist Together president. And I was watching your video, which is online. I loved it. I loved the music. I love the story about the Kingfisher. I thought, that's my friend. I know him. And I liked it a lot. You began telling us there a little bit about yourself, about your family, and what you might be like, should you be nominated for this role. So tell us a little bit more, because I think we've heard enough there about that. And from your profile, tell us a little bit about your faith journey. I think that might be a good place to begin this little chat together.
Well, I was born in a Christian family, a Baptist family. I was presented at Barking Baptist Tabernacle when I was a child. And we moved church when I was 5. We moved to another part of Barking, and I went to Utley Baptist Church. And so my childhood was spent in that context.
Right.
Over the years, I think there were many occasions when I responded to an invitation to follow Jesus. But I think the occasion when it felt most meaningful was in my early teens, when I heard Arthur Blessed, the American evangelist.
Yes.
He was speaking at West Ham Central Mission. And that for me was there was something extraordinary about that. That for me was a moment which, I felt changed the trajectory of my life. Mm-hmm. I grew up in that sort of culture. I often say that, there were many occasions when I became a Christian. But actually that was the occasion when it felt as though there was something significant at that point. So that was the beginnings of faith.
Right.
But then during my later teens, I did what is common to many young people. I didn't really follow through on that. And God was not a part of my life as far as I was concerned. And it wasn't until my early 20s when I was living in Leeds. I was a professional musician playing in the Orchestra of Opera North. And in my sort of early 20s, I began to just explore tentatively again.
Yes.
I went to a church, Moortown Baptist Church.
Yes.
And the way I describe it is that my faith was reawakened at that point. And that really was something special. There was something about the church. It was very welcoming. It was a church which had been significantly affected by St. Michael the Belfry and the ministry of David Watson. Mm-hmm. And I think there was something about the very gentle and intimate worship that drew me. It was a really good place to be. Mm-hmm. There were many special people there who've continued to be treasured in my life.
And did you sort of grow tremendously at that period?
Well, I did. I mean, it was
spurt of growth.
I mean, it was very challenging because I'd embraced the life of a musician. Mm-hmm. Let's say that. And so for me, it did feel quite costly because I was stepping aside from that expression of life. And I did grow significantly. Yeah. It was difficult in that I was on tour, so I didn't get to midweek meetings. I would listen to. It sounds all rather sort of antiquated now. I'd listen to teaching tapes.
Oh,
and
good old cassettes.
Yeah, cassettes, telet tapes they were called, and I'd listen to those. And Sundays, normally I didn't work on a Sunday, so I'd be in church. Yeah. And when I wasn't on tour or playing in Leeds, then I immersed myself in the local church as much as possible.
So you clearly, I'm getting the impression that you love this orchestral musical life. So it was quite a course this growth?
Yeah, it was, because I mean, music was my life.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would still say that music is very, very important to me. I feel as though I've had the privilege of having two vocations: a call to be a musician and a call to be a minister, and I'm profoundly grateful for that. But you know, it was difficult marrying my life as a musician and being a Christian. I didn't find that easy.
Well, I guess we'll hear something a bit more about that a little bit later in your title, Rhythms of Grace, if I've got that right.
Yeah, that's right.
The word rhythm really caught my imagination. I thought, oh, I love that word. Yeah. But I'm thinking of the course you were talking about only a few moments ago, because I wanted to develop our conversation to begin to explore your calling into Christian ministry, because and this idea of a cost.
Yes. Well, it was quite interesting when I went to the church, because I discovered after one church meeting, which I didn't attend because I was on tour or performing locally, that the church had actually put some money aside for me to go and train as an evangelist on a sort of weekend course. The impracticality was, of course, weekends were useless to me, because that's the time I'd definitely be working. But the interesting thing was that that's what they saw my gift was. Now, I always describe myself as a pastor with an evangelist's heart. But I think that they thought I was an evangelist because I'd taken a number of people along to the church.
Right.
But it was really quite easy, because I loved the church. And I'd say to people at Opera North, I'd say, you've got to come along to my church. It's absolutely fantastic. And so they did. And many of them, through coming to the church, they were touched by God, and they came to faith. And so people assumed I was an evangelist, but actually it wasn't because I'd gone through some sort of persuasive argument or anything. I just said, come and see, come and have a look.
A witness who loves your church and loves your Lord, and actually, so you invited people.
Actually, that's a pretty good way of evangelizing.
Well, of course it is.
But you have got to love your church before you do it. If you don't love your church, it's not going to work. But it was remarkably effective. But in terms of call to ministry, Kaz and I had been married a year. We were on holiday and we were talking about this, and we began to sort of explore what I called full-time Christian ministry. And I remember coming back from holiday and thinking, well, I'll have a chat to Michael Caddick, who was the minister, thinking that he would say, don't be ridiculous. And he said, no, I think this is the next thing you should do. And I have a good friend, John Wilson. John and Sue serve with BMS in France. I'm going to see them next week because I'm on sabbatical at the moment.
Hey, and I hope you're enjoying that.
Well, I'm going to pay them a pastoral visit in Paris.
So, how lovely! How lovely!
But I remember speaking to John, and John was very helpful, because he said, it's all very well talking about full-time Christian ministry, but do you feel you've got a particular call? And through exploring that, it seemed that yes, Baptist ministry was the direction in which I was being drawn. I told you about the tapes. I consumed books because I had the opportunity to do so with my particular lifestyle. So so that was the point really where I began to explore a call with the church, and I went through the
usual processes,
the processes which have become all too familiar.
Yes,
I ended up at Spurgeon's College for 4 years. So.
Excellent. And now you are in regional ministry, which we know. Tell us a little bit about the journey between Spurgeon's, not in too much detail, but give us some insight between Spurgeon's and where you are now as regional minister, team leader.
Well, I went first of all to Rye Baptist Church in East Sussex, which is a beautiful place.
It is a lovely, gorgeous place.
It's a gorgeous place, it is. And I was there for 5 years. So that felt like rural ministry, because although Rye is a town, actually it's got a village sense about it. And 5 years there, in which our second son Andrew was born. So those were very happy 5 years. And then we moved to Melton Mowbray, the land of the pork pie, where I spent 9 years. So again, a market town, although by the time I got there, the market had stopped operating. But both communities were very, they were identifiable as communities.
Yeah.
And I mean, Rye at that time had a population of about 5,000. I think Melton was about 33,000.
Yeah.
So I went to a church in Melton. It had practically a brand new building. So that was quite exciting. And as I say, I was there for 9 years.
Yes.
I would have carried on probably for another year had I not been called into regional ministry.
Right. So how long have you been a regional minister?
Oh, I'm into my 16th year.
Wow. Clearly enjoying it.
Yes. Challenging, but also, very rewarding. Privilege. Yeah, real privilege.
No, brilliant. And that brings us to this place. And here we are talking about the fact that your name has been put forward for our president, Baptist Together. As we think about Baptist Together, I wonder if you have any thoughts about, as the movement, what might be particularly significant for us at this time. Maybe challenges, maybe opportunities. Getting a little bit meatier in our conversation in just a moment or two.
No, indeed. I think in terms of what God might be saying to us as Baptists Together, we have a number of key priorities, and those weren't just plucked out of the air. Those were prayerfully discerned, and so we're talking about things like the implementation of Ignite, which is very important, development of leaders,
of course,
children, young people and families, CYF roundtable, pioneering, millennials. And the digital revolution, all those things. As I say, it wasn't a case of we'll focus on those. They came through reflecting prayerfully together. So I think those are the areas. I think when it comes to what God is saying to us, inevitably it trickles down to our churches and individuals. And I think that God always addresses the particular, and those are within those sort of areas and other areas. There are particular things that God is calling churches and ministers and ministers working in other areas of life, especially in chaplaincy, that God is particularly addressing in those situations. I think the emphasis that I'm bringing in terms of attentiveness to rhythms of grace, the challenge is to be noticing, to be looking out for what God is already doing, because God is present and active, and it never ceases to be at work. And our task is to discern what's happening, and then to participate in that and to delight in that, and that will take many expressions in different situations. As an association, we are committed to growing healthy churches in relationship for mission. We have our own particular strapline, which is walking together in ministry and mission, placing a huge emphasis upon ministry and mission, but also in this walking together alongside being with people and always being attentive to what God might be saying. So that's in terms of what God might be saying to us. In terms of sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I want to come back in a moment to attentiveness to God, but I wanted to explore for a moment longer challenges that you think we may be facing as a family, because I don't want to evade some of the more difficult stuff that may be.
Well, they are huge. I think we face some considerable challenges as a family. The church in the UK is in decline. It's in rapid decline, especially in rural areas. Over these last 16 years, I've been saying, as Baptists, we keep our head above water. I'm not sure we do, and that's challenging. Our congregations are aging, and I say that as a person who's aging. We have 150 churches in the Central Baptist Association. And I don't often go to churches where there are 20s or 30s. I mean, that's a rarity. We face challenges with ministry because my generation, we're getting to that point where we're retiring from pastoral ministry, but the numbers aren't being matched by the numbers who are coming into ministry at the other end, and there are issues of finance around that as well. I think that in terms of our society, we live in a time of huge anxiety.
Yes. I think you're right.
Especially in the wake of Brexit, we're deeply divided as a nation.
Yeah.
And that can't help, if our churches are to be real, that can't help but impinge upon the lives of our churches. We are distracted by endless things. Busyness is the name of the game. Some people wear busyness as a badge of pride.
Absolutely, yes, they do.
But other people have no choice. Some people are incredibly busy. I think of my friend who works in Morrison's, and on a Saturday evening he delivers our Indian takeaway. He's got 2 jobs, and that's not uncommon. So,
on that point, I don't want you to lose the thrust of what you're about to say, but in our midweek, we call it Growth Group or midweek Bible study, someone was challenging me only this week with the words, "But Rupert, we are tired."
Yes, people are tired. I think one of the fascinating things is, well, my parents' generation, they were very committed. If they said they'd do something, they would, and they would often commit themselves to a number of things. And I think, often people say, oh, well, people in the church aren't committed like they used to be. I think part of the issue is that they have a number of commitments. I mean, they need to commit to a number of things. And that again impinges on our church life. I mean, one of our sons, he has a dig at me because I wouldn't let him play football when he was growing up because football took place on a Sunday morning.
Okay, yes.
And we as a family, we did church on a Sunday morning. So I mean, I feel really sorry for him in that respect, but that's what we did.
Yeah.
I was the minister. I had no choice in the matter. If I wasn't, it might have been a different story. And the tugs and the pull. So I think many people in our churches are rightfully committed to a number of things. Yeah. So that means in terms of sustaining church life, that can be challenging. I think there are other issues. I think shamefully, the young people are making a lead on the environment, which is going to be totally major.
Yeah.
I think there are issues around same-sex marriage, gender, and we've come to a place on this, but for some of us, we don't go far enough. For others of us, we go too far.
Yeah.
So that's a conversation that's going to need to continue. So there are lots of challenges.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
But that's not the end of the story. But there are lots of challenges.
Absolutely. I was going to balance that a little bit by saying that because some of the opportunities would be the new ways we're discovering of doing church, of being church.
I think that's right. I mean, the church in this country doesn't have the privileged place it once had. And as Baptists, we should say hallelujah. As a people who began as dissenters, but we now find ourselves in a position where the church is very much on the margins, and that's a good place to be. We find ourselves in company with the New Testament church, and that brings opportunities. I remember a program on the television a number of years back. Anne Widdecombe, do you remember Anne Widdecombe,
yes.
the Member of Parliament?
Oh yes.
The program was called "Does Christianity Have a Future?" It wasn't a great series. I think it was 3 long. It wasn't great, but there was one memorable moment when Anne Widdecombe, and if you know Anne Widdecombe, you'll get the thrust of this. She wagged her finger at Rowan Atkinson, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and she said, "Does Christianity have a future?" And she repeated it. The finger was almost in his face, and he said, if you could hear his voice, he said, "Yes, because I believe in God." And it was a wonderful moment. Yeah. It was fantastic. Yeah. So with these challenges, the opportunities are there for us in terms of how we exercise our worship and our witness. And as I say, we find ourselves in company with the early church, and so in that sense, I'm I'm not without hope, but what the church nationally and what we as Baptists together will look like in 15 years' time, I mean, that could be very different.
Well, absolutely, because there's a huge amount of creativity in the early church faced with these situations. They had to discover how can they live their faith authentically in that environment.
It's often the chaos and the crisis that actually erupts into new expressions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Geoff, here we are, as I said earlier on. You've been approached at some point.
Yes.
And you said yes.
I did, yes.
Well,
I didn't come to that lightly. The person that asked me, it came a bit sort of left field. So I said, well, I'll have a think about it. And I had a think of it. And
so this wasn't a career aspirational thing for you?
No, it wasn't. No, I mean, a number of regional minister team leaders have become presidents, but I really didn't think of it. But then I've reflected on it, and I have somebody I see who's a spiritual accompanist, and I went through quite a long process with that person, and I thought I will agree that my nomination goes forward. The association were very, very supportive, and other friends with whom I spoke. So. I'm seeking to hold it lightly and see what happens.
Exactly. Well, let's see what God's people are saying.
Yeah, indeed.
Attentiveness to God, as we were saying at the front end, rhythms of grace, something which really captured my imagination as a title. Can you take us a little bit deeper, give us a little bit of an insight as to what that might be looking like as you begin to explore? I remember during my time of presidency, my theme changed somewhat as I was traveling our country, sharing this theme on Anointed to Do Good. I found myself beginning to adapt what God had initially birthed within me, but I hadn't lost the central birthing of that message, which I was able to bring to the family. Is that similar for you in the sense of the birthing, and what might it look like?
I don't know what it's going to look like. I mean, I haven't got a program that I'm thinking that I'll bring with me. I think I'll be open and available to invitations. But I think for me, the attentiveness thing has been something that's been there from the beginning. When I first went to Moortown Baptist Church, that was at a time when a book had been written by, his name's going to elude me now, anyway, Celebration of Discipline.
Oh yes, Foster.
That's it, Richard Foster. Thank you. That book had an impact. I mean, it was quite different from any of the books that I'd read before on spirituality. And soon after that, Joyce Huggett wrote a book called Listening to God.
Yes.
And I think that was very significant because she wrote as an evangelical, a charismatic, but also as a contemplative. And I think even when I was at Spurgeon's, even then I was beginning to explore that third strand. I recall going to Taizé at the end of my second year at Spurgeon's. That was quite an unusual thing for somebody at Spurgeon's.
Yes.
And I started taking quiet days, just beginning to explore that side of things. So I am committed to our Baptist story and all that we are. But I've always had that sort of strand where attentiveness in terms of I guess quiet prayer, listening prayer. As a pastor, I think that's undergirded what I've done. In terms of defining my ministry, I've sought to be attentive to God and to help other people be attentive to God. And one of the questions that I've sought to ask myself for a number of years is when I meet a person to ask the question, and again it's this attentiveness thing, what is God already doing in this person's life, and how can I help? So the attentiveness isn't just about being contemplative in prayer, but it's being attentive to all of life.
Yes. What I like, if I may interject briefly, what I love about what you're saying is this attentiveness to what God is already doing, because so often we become distracted by whatever, that we miss what God is already or may well already be doing.
Well, God is always previous. God always takes the initiative. So for us, it is being attentive. It's discerning what God, who is always present and always active, and what God is already doing. It's not us doing and asking God to join in. It's actually seeking what God is already doing. I've been involved in the founding of the Order for Baptist Ministry, and that has these three commitments. A commitment, good background music here. There you go, stopped. It has a commitment to prayer and a more contemplative approach to prayer. It's a commitment to meeting in a group, and a commitment to ministries, a commitment to accountability. But undergirding that is this approach to prayer. And on my last sabbatical, I undertook these Ignatian spiritual exercises, which sounds all a bit mysterious, but I view as a school of prayer, or even a school of discipleship. And one of the phrases that's used in relation to that is finding God in all things. I think that's really important, because to backtrack to the issue of challenges and opportunities, it's there where we're seeking to find God in all that's going on there, because God is not absent.
Absolutely.
And so that's the background to all of this. And I'd be very keen to explore that with churches and groups of churches and ministers who would like to do that. One of the things that I'm wondering about is a series of conversations with people in very different situations, asking what it's like for them to attend to rhythms of grace, and what's it like to the hospital chaplain to be attentive to rhythms of grace, or the person working with the homeless, or the person working alongside those with mental health, or the minister of a big church, or the minister of a smaller church, or somebody who's engaged with young people or children. What would that attentiveness to rhythms of grace look like for them? And of course, there is no prescriptive answer to that, because it would be dependent entirely on their experience. So I guess all of this is about wanting to encounter and experience God, and to go deeper in God. And I think we need that. We need that for our ministry and our mission. This is not some sort of just being spiritual for the sake of being spiritual. This results in our, I guess Ken would talk about whole life discipleship. It's for the whole lot. Ken mentioned that present.
And it's just beautifully focused, isn't it? So one of the things that excites me about what you're saying as I listen to you, and as I watched the video earlier online, was I often say to leaders in the church I'm at, what is the Spirit of God already doing here?
Well, and
it's a fascinating exercise to simply wait on God and to hear each other and explore together what we sense. Because I would want to say to them, and I do, now let's come into agreement with what God is already doing, as opposed to trying to find some new program or something.
And I think that's what we've sought to do with our key priorities. I mean, that's the process there. It's not as though what I'm saying is coming out of the blue. It's where we are already. It's just giving you a particular point of view.
So you maybe, should you become our president, enabling churches, helping churches to ask those kind of pointed, significant, focused questions as they discern their way forward for the will and the purpose of God among them.
Yes, indeed.
My brother, thank you so very much. It's been good chatting with you.
I've enjoyed talking with you. We know each other well, and this is rather strange to talk like this.
I know it does feel a bit strange, but enjoyable. Enjoyable.
Yes, thank you.
And it's been great. Let's see what God does as God's people respond and hopefully this interview, this little chat, will be helpful in helping them to come to a sense of what God may be saying for us at this time.
Well, that would be my prayer.
Bless
Okay.
you, my brother.
Bless you.
Thanks a lot.